The first chill of an Arkansas autumn was seeping into the thin planks of the shed, a damp cold that felt different from the comforting cool of her own house. At 80 years old, Elara knew the language of the seasons in her bones, but this was a foreign dialect of neglect. From her makeshift bed, a lumpy mattress thrown over a stack of yellowing newspapers, she could hear the rhythmic violence of a nail gun, each shot a punctuation mark in the story of her home's erasure. They had called it a renovation, a loving gesture. Her nephew, Mark, and his wife, Sarah, had descended upon her with wide smiles and grave concerns about her safety and comfort. The old wiring, the drafty windows, the worn linoleum, all of it had to go. For her. "We'll build you the home you deserve, Aunt Elara," Mark had said, his hand covering hers, though his eyes were already measuring the dimensions of the living room for a flat-screen TV. Sarah, all sharp angles and even sharper ambition, had chimed in, "A fresh start. It will be so much easier for you to get around." And so, they moved her here, into the shed. A place for forgotten things, rusted tools, broken canning jars, and now, it seemed, an old woman. The single bare bulb hanging from a cord cast long, dancing shadows that looked like spiders, a constant, silent mockery of her displacement. The first few days were a blur of dust and noise. They brought her meals on paper plates, their visits brief and filled with cheerful, hollow updates. "The new drywall is up, you wouldn't even recognize the place," Sarah would chirp, standing in the doorway as if afraid the poverty of the shed was contagious. Elara, a woman forged by the Great Depression and a lifetime of Ozark resilience, held her tongue. She had seen hardship, had buried a husband, and had worked this land since she was a girl. Her strength wasn't in her voice, but in her endurance. But as the days bled into weeks, a cold dread began to bloom in her chest, colder than the November air. They were not just renovating her house, they were erasing her. One afternoon, desperate for something to anchor her to her own life, she began to sift through the boxes that had been unceremoniously dumped in the shed with her. They were filled with the sediment of her life with John. Old photographs, his worn work gloves, a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon. In the bottom of a heavy cedar trunk, beneath a quilt her grandmother had stitched, her fingers brushed against a stiff, leather-bound folder. She didn't remember John ever showing it to her, but she recognized his neat, deliberate handwriting on the label, for safekeeping. With trembling hands, she opened it. The first document was beautiful in its antiquity, the ink faded but the calligraphy still elegant. It was the original deed to the property, granted to her great-great-grandfather under the Donation Land Act of 1840, a piece of paper that tied her bloodline to this very soil. It detailed a lineage of ownership that flowed through her mother, to her. But it was the second document, tucked neatly behind the first, that made her breath catch in her throat. It was a quitclaim deed, dated just 5 years ago. She remembered the day now. John, his face etched with a worry he rarely showed, had driven them to a lawyer in town. He'd been concerned about Mark's get-rich-quick schemes and the covetous way he looked at their farm. "This just makes it clean, Elara," John had said, his voice a low rumble. "This house, this land, it came from your people. This makes sure it stays with you. No questions, no arguments. It's yours and yours alone." A quitclaim deed in Arkansas transfers ownership interest without warranty, a simple, powerful tool often used between trusted parties to clear up a title. John had trusted her, and in doing so, had given her a shield. He had seen this coming. The realization hit her not with anger, but with a profound, aching love for the man she had lost. He was still protecting her. Holding the papers, a lifetime of quiet patience in her veins solidified into a core of pure, unyielding steel. They thought her old, frail, and forgetful. They thought this house was theirs for the taking. A slow, determined smile touched Elara's lips for the first time in weeks. She would let them finish. She would let them pour every last cent of their greedy ambition into the gleaming new floors, the granite countertops, and the stainless steel appliances. They were, after all, building a magnificent gift. For her. Her mind, once clouded with sorrow, was now sharp and clear. She remembered the old prepaid cell phone John had insisted they keep for emergencies, tucked in the glove box of his old pickup. That night, under the dim light of the shed's single bulb, she found it. The battery was low, but it held a charge. Her fingers, stiff with arthritis, carefully dialed the number of her old neighbor, David Henderson, a retired lawyer whose friendship with John had spanned 4 decades. "David," she whispered, her voice raspy but firm. "It's Elara. I need your help. And I need you to be very, very quiet about it." The day of the big reveal was a spectacle of breathtaking arrogance. Mark and Sarah, glowing with self-congratulation, led Elara from the musty darkness of the shed into the blindingly bright, renovated house. The scent of fresh paint and new carpet was acrid, a chemical overlay on a century of memories. The walls were a sterile gray, the floors a gleaming, soulless laminate. Her cozy, cluttered home had been transformed into a showroom, cold and impersonal. It was beautiful, if you had no soul. A handful of Mark and Sarah's friends were there, sipping wine from plastic cups and murmuring their admiration. You've done a wonderful thing, one of them said, patting Mark on the back. Mark cleared his throat, raising his cup for a toast. We just wanted to give Aunt Elara a safe, modern place to live out her golden years, he announced, his voice slick with false sentiment. And to make sure she's well taken care of, Sarah and I will be moving in to help manage the property. It's the least we can do. He smiled at Elara, a predatory, expectant smile that waited for her tears of gratitude. At that precise moment, the newly installed front door opened. David Henderson stepped inside, his presence filling the room with a quiet authority. Beside him stood a man in the uniform of the county sheriff. Mark's smile faltered. David? What's going on? Elara took a slow step forward, her small frame radiating an unexpected power. She looked around the room, at the new fixtures, the expensive appliances, the hand-scraped floors that had likely cost a small fortune. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Sarah, she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the awkward silence. The house is finished. You did a wonderful job renovating it. She let the words hang in the air, a silken trap. But I think there has been a terrible misunderstanding. You weren't renovating my house. From the worn pocket of her cardigan, she produced the leather-bound folder. Her hands were perfectly still as she unfolded the documents. You were renovating your gift to me. She held up the antique, handwritten deed first. This land was granted to my family in 1840. It passed to my mother, and then to me. It has never belonged to anyone else. Then, she held up the second paper, the quitclaim deed. And just to ensure there was never any confusion, my late husband, John, had me sign this quitclaim deed years ago. It legally solidifies that this property is solely and completely mine, with no other claims. I never signed anything over to you. I never agreed to you moving in. Sarah's face had turned a blotchy, horrified red. Mark stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape, the picture of a man who had just watched his future burn to the ground. Elara turned her calm, steady gaze to the sheriff. These people, she said, her voice dropping, have been keeping me in a shed on my own property for the last 6 weeks. They have destroyed my home and my belongings without my consent, which, as I understand it, is a form of elder exploitation here in Arkansas. David Henderson stepped forward, his lawyerly demeanor taking over. The documents are legally ironclad, he stated calmly. What has happened here constitutes illegal use of a person's property and could be prosecuted as a criminal offense. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Sarah's choked gasp. The friends began to back away, their faces a mixture of shock and embarrassment, melting away like snow in the sun. Elara delivered the final, devastating blow. Her eyes, clear and bright, met Mark's. You have 24 hours to remove your personal belongings. Thank you for the lovely renovation. Now, get out of my house. The exodus was a quiet, humiliating affair. Under the stoic watch of the sheriff, Mark and Sarah frantically gathered their things, their earlier triumph curdled into bitter defeat. The house, so recently filled with their smug laughter, now echoed with the sounds of their hasty retreat. In the days that followed, the community, having heard the story, rallied around Elara. David Henderson's wife brought over a hot casserole. The farmer down the road sent his 2 sons to help move Elara's furniture back from the shed. Piece by piece, memory by memory, she began to reclaim her space. She placed her grandmother's rocking chair in the center of the sterile living room, its worn wood a defiant anchor to the past. She hung the old, faded photographs back on the freshly painted walls, covering the cold gray with the warm faces of her ancestors. She kept some of the changes, the walk-in shower was a practical luxury her old knees appreciated, and the new wiring was admittedly safer. But she filled the house with her life, her quilts, her books, and the lingering scent of baking bread, slowly but surely turning the soulless structure back into a home. Months later, sitting on her porch swing, watching the sun set over the Ozark Hills, Elara felt a profound sense of peace. The house was a testament not to their greed, but to her resilience. They had tried to bury her, but they had forgotten she was a seed. John had known it. He had made sure she had the tools she needed to grow again, even in the harshest of winters. She had not only survived, she had bloomed. Thank you for watching this incredible true story of resilience and justice. If you were moved by Elara's strength, please show your support by hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel for more stories of real people who refuse to be broken.